Okay guys, so I'm back here for day 2 of the preliminary hearings for the David soon-to-be trial. It's not a trial yet, right now it's just hearings, but everybody has been kind of following. Just had a very interesting conversation with Steve Fisher, the private investigator. He had a very hectic day yesterday. He had a little bit of beef with the Deputy District Attorney, Beth Silverman. He kind of broke that down for me. Hopefully we'll speak to him a little bit more, might even be able to get an interview with him later. But the plan for today is we're going to be hearing more from a financial manager of David's. He basically was handling his finances, helping pay his invoices, working with his mother to actually, you know, they were trying to raise a bail at a certain point because they thought he was going to get arrested on a $2 million bail. They were basically dealing with all of his finances, moving properties and money between trusts, setting up trusts. There was a lot of interesting stuff. The biggest thing yesterday that I heard that I don't think I've told you guys yet, they reported that apparently over the course of his career from like 2022, 23 to 2025, when all of this kind of came to a head at the end of that year, they're saying David made like $11.5 million roughly, between 10 and $11.5 million. So he was getting a whole lot of money. Clearly he had a lot of money to deal with, and apparently his management team took like $3 to $4 million of that. So everybody was getting a lot of money. It seemed like everybody had a lot to lose, and it seems like they're trying to kind of let everybody know that financial element of the crime, that, you know, he may well have committed this murder in order to, you know, keep his business going, to protect his business interests, to keep all of that money flying. So it was a very, very interesting day. We were halfway through this financial testimony. We're likely going to kick straight off with the financial manager once again, and he was getting grilled. He was getting grilled by both sides, the prosecution and the defense. He was having a rough day in court, and they were calling him out for maybe saying a few things at the grand jury that didn't add up and were kind of different to what he was saying now. So he had his lawyer with him. It was definitely very, very serious, but I'll keep you guys posted. We're about to go and enter the raffle. Hopefully we'll get into the courtroom again today. The courthouse staff were very fair and reasonable, and we managed to get in there as media yesterday. Let's see how it goes today. We're going to try our best, but there's a lot of people here interested in the case, and we're going to just kind of keep digging and getting as close as we possibly can. So hope you found this helpful. This is just the intro of a bigger update that's going to come, and I'm going to try and keep you guys updated a lot more today. It was a little bit hectic yesterday, and I kind of had to get home and just kind of get all of my notes off, but I'm going to try and give you much more comprehensive updates as I go through it today. So I'll keep you guys posted. Thank you for watching, and I will see you there. Okay, so I'm back here outside the David hearing. Okay, there is a lot of press out here, a lot of interviews, a lot of media going on. A whole load of people in here today. It is a very busy day. It's very hectic. A lot of very, very interesting updates. We've just kind of had back-to-back updates from about 3 witnesses back-to-back. We finished off the witness that we were hearing from yesterday on the finances, which I haven't updated you on. So what I might do is just give you right here outside the courthouse, just the fullest, longest update that I can possibly give you on kind of everything that's came out right at the end of yesterday. That last bit of testimony I didn't have enough time to give you last night, and then I'll follow on with kind of everything new today, the complete conclusion of David's financial management's testimony, and basically just I'll throw everything I've got to you right up until this break. We're on break now. I'm very quickly recording the video, but we just heard some very, very interesting testimony from an officer that found Celeste's ID card, and also a criminalist that was actually there on scene deconstructing the Tesla. Found a bunch of air fresheners inside it. I'll break it all down to you here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand my camera over to my very legendary assistant right here, who is helping me out. How am I looking? Am I good? Right, I got so many notes. I've got my booklet. Sometimes they were talking so fast that I had to move to the laptop. So I actually just have an absolute copious amount of notes for you guys today, and I'm actually going to kind of go back into some of my notes from yesterday. So if you watch the video that I uploaded last night, you will see that I kind of cut short, just short of talking about this kind of financial manager's testimony, because I was recording non-stop till like 11 at night. I gave you all the information I could, and that testimony was only halfway through. So I figured, why not just give you that full update now that we've heard everything else you had to say. There was some more explosive stuff that came out, and honestly, it was pretty insane. So like, I've got my whole laptop here, I've got all my details, okay, and basically this was, there was a lot. So let me just get up to the exact point that I wanted to start on, where they basically spoke with somebody who is like a financial manager for David. I won't tell you his name, but he was an interesting looking character. I'm not going to lie to you, he came into court he was wearing like a button-up shirt, but he wasn't looking like sharp like a lawyer. He was looking a little bit casual, and he had a tattoo under his ear of like an upside-down cross, which I'm not gonna lie, I thought that maybe it was like some satanic thing. I was thinking, who on earth is this gonna be? But he was a sort of financial manager. He was somebody that's kind of, you know, done some backstory basically when it comes to dealing with David's finances. They basically went back and forth about a whole bunch of different points to do with his management company, working for all these different people. So basically said that he was employed by Mogul Vision, which is sort of David's management company. They basically said that he was conducting day-to-day bookkeeping, financial matters, helping sort of their artists and touring musicians. But in the end, he kind of said, well, we didn't really have much going on other than David. We was all basically here doing stuff with David. So essentially, he'd been working with them for years. He said that he met Josh Marshall sort of like late mid 2017, worked with Josh while he was kind of, you know, building up his business. He previously worked at like a very serious and successful accounting kind of management firm, and basically kind of like gave a lot of backstory and details on some of that stuff. Tell you what, I feel like maybe let's move over here because it's so hectic over here. There's a lot going on. I think let me kind of go and grab this little corner over here where it's a little bit quieter. But I'll keep talking. I'm going to keep talking. We're not going to cut. So from there, we basically kind of heard like some backstory about how he'd been working with Josh for several years. They'd been kind of, you know, collaborating on Mogul Vision. He was like the director of finance, like a senior finance manager, and he was really a big part of what was going on with David's finances. He actually did testify at the previous grand jury, which was really interesting. And what we ended up finding out was that, you know, Josh Marshall, he owned Mogul Vision. They really, at their peak, only had one sort of official client, which was David. Now, what was very, very interesting about that is he said, when it comes to Josh Marshall, he said, look, we're colleagues, not friends. He was very specific. He was like, I wouldn't say we're friends. Maybe there was a time back in the day I would have seen him as a friend, but in sort of this situation where we got to where it was like all of this stuff was going on behind the scenes with David, he basically said, like, we ain't really friends anymore. Like, that's not what it was. So basically said that they last spoke to Josh at the start of June, which is pretty recently. He said that they hadn't really talked in much detail. They just had like a 2-3 minute phone call. They basically sort of asked him repeatedly, have you spoken to Josh about the case? And he basically said Josh refused to have any conversations about the David case. Basically wouldn't talk to him about it whatsoever, wouldn't open up about it. Now, he talked about his salary. He was getting like $100,000 a year from Mogul Vision. Apparently he was getting $200,000 in total bonuses. And so like $300,000, apparently he had said at the grand jury that he was getting 250. He revised that down. There were a lot of back and forth where it was kind of like a case where they said, you know, the amount that you said previously has changed. I think he was worried about kind of perjuring himself in front of the grand jury, but I feel like maybe it was sort of correcting the record. It sounds like maybe there was some kind of financial dispute going on behind the scenes with like, you know, the finance people that were kind of working on Mogul Vision. So that was very, very interesting. And basically he said that he wouldn't be earning any money this year from David and Mogul Vision, and we kind of heard some more stuff later on from you know, a financial manager at Interscope that basically kind of, you know, broke down some of the backstory as far as the money that David was getting, like him officially getting dropped from the label, all that kind of stuff. I'm going to keep walking around this corner if we can find a spot where we're not interrupting anybody else's stuff that they got going on as well. But basically, okay, sorry, my bad, we're doing a little dance over here, it's all good. So basically, he would explain that although he doesn't really see Josh Marshall as a friend, oh look, we've got our own little private alleyway here, this is beautiful. All right, this is perfect. So look, all right, we're in my little secret dingy alleyway at the courthouse now. This is my whole spot. So basically, from here, what we found out was that he still considered Rob Morgenroth a friend. Now, I speak to you guys previously about Rob Morgenroth. He was somebody that seemingly knew a lot, and we found out in this testimony that he definitely did know some of the things that were going on, and he was even getting pressed about that. So he basically said that he was introduced to Rob through Mogul Vision. He knew Josh first. He was still in touch with Rob. He sees him as a friend, and he spoke to him more than a week ago. So apparently they spoke about the case. They spoke very recently. He apparently was shown some stuff where basically Rob was getting in touch with him, talking about David's mother was worried that she was being wiretapped, her records were being subpoenaed, and was going back and forth. Apparently had a very close relationship with David's family, confirmed that Rob was basically David's day-to-day manager, and from there he kind of explained that, you know, this was quite a complicated business, there was a lot going on, said that he helped David set up a trust and that got handed to another attorney. That was kind of followed by him basically I'm getting a pop-up here, hang on. Basically, working with David's mum, Colleen Burke, who was the finance director, apparently she was paid $75,000 a year to basically handle David LLC. She was supposed to approve all bills that were paid. She was involved in the conversation of any household utility requirements, utility bills. The 2 homes that were purchased, one in Cypress, Texas, and one in Hempstead, depending on where you're from, what you say. In the UK, we got Hampstead, but I think it's different. I think it's Hempstead in this. But anyway, they kind of broke down all the different LLCs that David has, the different trusts that he had, the attempts to kind of move his properties into a different trust. And he basically confirmed that he had had a conversation with David's mother about moving the properties into a different trust that wasn't owned by David, so that Celeste family couldn't sue them in civil court and go after those assets, which honestly was pretty crazy to me, to be completely honest with you. That was wild. So basically, one of the most damning things that we heard was that apparently they usually communicated by text message, iMessage, FaceTime audio. Apparently, after the body of Celeste was found in the car, suddenly everybody wanted to switch to encrypted messaging apps. They moved over to Signal, they moved over to WhatsApp, and Josh and Rob were basically using Signal after the news of the body in David's car was found, after the news came out with that. And then also, they're saying that David's mother was also using Signal, so she was also spooked about her communications being intercepted, anything like that. And basically, they switched over to encrypted communications. He said, I didn't get given a specific reason for moving over, but it just so happened that that was happening after the body was found, which obviously is suspicious in itself. Basically, Colleen, Josh, and Rob all switched over to Signal after the body was found. He basically said he still speaks to Rob regularly in normal channels. He said the communications wasn't consistent. He spoke to David on regular phone calls previously, but hadn't spoken in a long time. Said the last time that he actually saw David's mother in person was when David opened for SZA in Miami. He said he wasn't sure that was end of 2024, start of 2025, but said that he'd spoke to Colleen Burke last week, and get this, they said, why did you speak to David's mother last week? They said, oh, she asked me to try and help him find another entertainment lawyer. Not a criminal lawyer, not a civil lawyer, an entertainment lawyer. And this connects to all of the research that I've been showing you guys on the channel recently about allegations that he's trying to put out his deluxe album independently, that he's trying to make a return to music. There was rumors the album was going to come out on the 17th and they pulled back. I believe they were going to drop that album, and then they saw the backlash and pulled back. But clearly, behind the scenes, David's mother, as recently as last week, is trying to get an entertainment attorney to basically manage David's affairs. Apparently, they still speak regularly. He still does work for David's mother. He's trying to help them find a new entertainment attorney, and he said he's being paid by Colleen and David $7,500 a month as a retainer. And he basically guesstimated that David had generated between $10 to $11.5 million in gross earnings between 2023 and 2025. And I've got more information on his earnings that's going to come in the next session. So basically, he signed in 2022 to Interscope. He got a $600K advance. He was due another payment at the end of 2022 for the bulk of his deal. Ended up being about $2.4 million. And as we found out, as the guy from Interscope basically came through, he would kind of break down exactly how much David was paid every single year. So he explained that some tours lose money. You know, he basically was apparently paid, I think, about $1 million in expenses from his tour. He had like spent money out of pocket to kind of run his crazy tour. We were seeing him going around with, you know, fake coffins for the tour, all kinds of stage management and stuff. So it was clearly a big year, a big operation. Now, what was interesting, everybody's talked about, oh, you can't talk about David's brother, don't talk about Caleb. Beth Silverman brought up Caleb, and they said, did you hire a music attorney for David? What about Caleb? Are you hiring an entertainment attorney for him? And he said, no, not for Caleb. But that was a very, very interesting point, and I almost felt like not many people in the courtroom kind of clocked what was going on there, because I have this suspicion that they're basically trying to get Caleb's music career off the ground now, so that they can kind of get the returns coming in like when David was at his heyday. Because apparently the whole family was reliant on David. David had paid off the family mortgage, was moving the family homes into trusts. Basically, the real estate values that David could well have had was $2 million. Sounded like he had over $2 million in cash in a liquid Morgan Stanley trust account. So he was absolutely rolling in it. He was papered up. He had a whole lot of money. So they basically said that apparently what they were trying to do is get $2 million in cash, because they were anticipating in all that period after the body was found but before David was arrested, 7 months, they were apparently scrambling behind the scenes. David, his mother, and his financial management team, they were all trying to basically raise $2 million in cash in case he actually was offered the opportunity to get a bail, and they were ready to bail him out. Obviously, we found out now it ain't no bail. The crimes are way too heinous for any sort of bail to be brought to the table. But basically, he had all this money in different accounts. He had an IRA account that ended up getting liquidated after the kind of situation came about, and he needed to get money out of his IRA for a potential $2 million bail. Apparently, Mogul Vision, the company that was managing David, made between sort of like $3 to $4 million between 2023 to 2024. So David's getting like $11 million. His management team is getting damn near half of it, $3 to $4 million. And apparently there was even more money on the table. So we kind of heard about these encrypted communications, and there was a very, very interesting back and forth where Beth basically said, Josh called you on Signal. Did you speak to Rob while he was on tour with David after the body was found? He said yes. And she said, did you ask Rob the details of what he knew? And he said, curiously, I asked Rob what he knew. And she said, why did you tell the grand jury you didn't ask? Because you didn't want to know. And he basically said, well, my testimony today is that I asked him, and it's true. I don't want to perjure myself, but, basically he confirmed I wasn't truthful to the grand jury. And Beth said, what questions did you ask Rob? And he said, I asked Rob what happened. And she said, did he tell you? And he said, he did tell me, yes. And that was it. She didn't ask any more questions. We're thinking, what did he tell you? She didn't get into it. Maybe we're going to hear that down the line. Maybe we're going to hear from Robert himself. I wouldn't be surprised. But basically from there, they said that he kind of continued to speak to them, to speak to David sort of after the tour was cancelled. And essentially from there, they kind of started discussing money and bail and putting up the $2 million, putting up homes for collateral. Apparently it was never really planned for David to actually put up the family home for part of the collateral. Apparently that home was worth a lot of money, as much as $950,000 upwards. And apparently that house was the most valuable asset in the whole David empire, but that apparently wasn't on the table. But they were scrambling to get $2 million cash so that they could actually pay that bail. So from there, he basically confirmed that, that he had basically helped David's mother move money around to try and raise this $2 million bail. Didn't end up being useful in the end, and he confirmed, I helped her move the property out of David's name into a trust so that I could basically help her avoid losing a bunch of money and losing the house in a civil judgment. So that was pretty bad. Now, he ended up getting kind of cross-examined, and they basically, I would say that like Blair Burke and kind of David's defense lawyers, like their strategy was really to try and sort of say, look, David didn't access any of the accounts, did he? He didn't even pay his utility bills. He didn't know the first thing. He didn't even know how much money he was making. They were basically trying to portray David as like a little kid, like, you little kid, you don't know how much money's coming in. He doesn't know how much money's in the account. He didn't even pay the bills. He didn't have a clue how much money he had or what assets he had. He was just oblivious. He was just a little kid singer boy that just got all this motion going, and basically that was kind of as far as he could kind of get with it. So are you, let me hold the camera for a bit, because I know it gets a little bit tiring. So I'm just going to take over for a second, but we'll switch back soon, because I can kind of rattle off some stuff from memory. But basically, okay, this is kind of like, all of my notes that I've got. I know I've been talking for quite a long time, but I do have a lot of notes, and I want to try and just get through all of them. So that was really, that was the gist, in my opinion. Basically, it felt like what they were trying to do with that financial management, as far as the defense goes, was really just trying to portray him in kind of like a light of that he was doing. They were basically wiping David's ass for him, doing absolutely everything. His mum was paying the credit card bill. He didn't even know. He didn't even have his own money. Didn't have a clue what was going on with his finances, and basically was just like spinning it that he was a minor too, that he was a kid when he started. He was under 18 when he started his career. He was getting all of this money. Some of that money was kind of in this sort of like trust for a little bit, where he basically didn't even have access to a lot of his money. As a minor, a lot of that money was apparently entrusted to his parents for a period of time, then he turned 18. And honestly, I feel like it was a very, very, very interesting explanation of how they're going to try and portray him as this sort of kid that has no idea what's going on. There were some laughs at the end of that testimony on yesterday's session, when basically they said David's mother, Colleen, was kind of the contact for David's career. They said Colleen was supposed to use QuickBooks and log all of the kind of basically, Colleen was supposed to use QuickBooks and log like all of the financial transactions that David had going on. And basically, it sounds like she was awful at that. We kind of was hearing this testimony where the whole court laughed. They said, was she any good at using QuickBooks? They said no. And they said, did she get better at it? And they said, no, I'm just getting a drink out while I'm talking to you guys, because there is a lot going on. But basically, that was the end of it yesterday. When it kicked off today, we basically got straight back into the same person who was kind of giving backstory on exactly what had been going on with, this kind of like financial manager. So sort of when we got in there today, thankfully I did manage to get a seat on the waiting list for the independent media, which was great. I really appreciate them making that happen and being supportive of the independent media. So from there, the judge kind of wanted to start early. David came in, nodded at Blair. He looked somewhat confident to me. And Blair, I've noticed Blair kind of keeps rubbing David's shoulder. She sort of rubs his shoulder, very supportive, almost like maternal instinct that she's giving. And at one point at the start, before everything kicked off, she kind of put her arm around him a little bit and sort of had her arm on the back of his chair, sort of cradling him a little bit. It was kind of very motherly. I don't know if that's the sort of, that's kind of included with the service, or whether, you know, she genuinely is supporting him, comforting him, perhaps because it was going to be a bad day. But basically, Celeste's parents were in the courtroom again today. Apparently there was no objection to them being there by the defense. They basically said, look, we don't know if they're going to have any information or if they're going to be testifying. Right now it's not standing that they're going to be testifying at trial. The judge said if they do become official trial witnesses, that might change things and maybe they shouldn't be there. But for now, she was okay with them being there, and that was kind of accepted. So as kind of time went on, we sort of, you know, continued with this this sort of financial manager's testimony. And from there, we kind of just heard like a lot of the same stuff that we had heard yesterday. It sort of went around in circles a little bit, but basically what was made very clear was that like David doesn't have no logins for any of his accounts, has no logins, didn't use any of his bank accounts. But this was the thing, they kind of talked circles around themselves. So it started off with the defense basically defending and saying that, you know, David didn't have any access to his accounts, didn't know how it all worked, like didn't pay his utilities, he didn't know the first thing about money. Sorry, you couldn't open that for me, could you? Appreciate it, man. He didn't know the first thing about money. But then basically like once, appreciate it, I'm thirsty. Okay, so kind of like once the prosecution were able to ask a few more questions, they really started to gun for him, and this was brutal. I just did a little short update about this, but at one point, and the judge was actually really pissed off about this, at one point, Beth Silverman, the deputy district attorney, started firing off crazy info, saying, okay, David never questioned how much money was coming in. He didn't question how much money he was expected to make. He didn't care about that. He wasn't involved in any financial aspect of the business. And they basically said, okay, I won't say the guy's name, but he said to the financial manager, okay, were you aware that Josh hired a security guard to live with David? This is where shit got absolutely crazy. I couldn't believe what I was hearing, right? He said, yeah, David was getting so popular, I thought it was a good idea to get a security guard. And basically said, you know, his celebrity status, he was vulnerable, people were trying to get at him, take pictures, whatever, okay? So he got a security guard. They gave the name. I'm not going to say the name of the security guard at all because I don't want to cause no problems. Basically said, were you aware of the expenses and costs of the security guard? Yes. Were you aware of the name of the security guard? They confirmed the name in court. They said part of the duty was to live with David. All right. And then this is where Beth started whiling out, and the judge actually wasn't happy about it. Basically said, this was just insane. Were you aware that this security guard was living with David? Yes. Were you aware that this security guard, were you aware that Celeste was living in the house for a period of time too? And that was kind of like, I don't know, didn't know anything about that. And then the judge kind of like, what's this? You can't speculate on what someone else said. And then Beth kind of slapped straight back before the judge really even finished what she was saying, and basically said, were you aware that the security guard was driving David and Celeste around with fake IDs and taking them to nightclubs? And before he could answer, the judge was like, whoa, you're doing way too much. And it was like, the courtroom was like, whoa, like, I can't believe you've just revealed that. So we've not actually heard that in confirmed testimony, but basically the deputy DA is putting it out there. And I hope that we hear from that security guard eventually, but he basically says, were you aware that that security guard that you hired and you were paying for was taking David and his minor girlfriend around to nightclubs in Hollywood with fake IDs? And then the judge was like, whoa, like the judge, Blair, everyone's like, whoa, we object, like, no, shut that down immediately. And that did get shut down, and no more questions were kind of allowed along those lines. After that, it was also brought up, were you aware that David had bought these kind of flight tickets for the flight for Celeste and David to fly to London? We talked about that yesterday, and I confirmed that in a previous video, but it was basically, he said, no, we didn't pay for the airline tickets. We didn't know anything about the airline tickets, had no idea that David was flying out there with this minor, and it was basically established, so I guess he wasn't completely financially illiterate. I guess he did have a little bit of money on the side where he could pay for stuff on his own, because apparently he had booked that flight for Celeste on his own separately. Now, Beth Silverman was basically attacking at this point, saying, what is the deal with like Rob and Josh? Did they know that David was flying out there with a minor? Did you speak about Celeste going to London and Texas? And basically he admitted, yeah, I did speak to Rob about David flying with Celeste to London, not Texas. And she also asked, did you speak to any of the team or David's mother about the fact that Celeste had gone out to meet the family? And the judge really wasn't having that. So basically he said, did you see the flight to London on any of the expense accounts that you were aware of. And basically, he basically said he didn't see it. He wasn't aware of that flight. It was talked, there was a conversation about it later down the line, but he wasn't aware of it. So basically, they said, pretty much like, did you know if David had any other means to pay for this flight? That didn't end up getting answered. There was an objection to that. They asked, did you speak about Celeste? He said no. Did you ask if she lived in the house? Said no. Did you ask him about the drive into nightclub? Said no. Basically just said no, I didn't know. And then the judge got really pissed when Beth said, did you ask him about what was happening in the house? And the judge was just like, okay, this is way too vague. You're asking about what other people are doing. Everyone was getting pissed off. The judge kind of slapped Beth down at this point. But she was on fire, I'm not going to lie to you. It was almost like, yeah, the information she was firing off was so damning. It was like the Blair and the other side, it was like they was objecting to everything. Everyone was interrupting each other, cutting each other off. It was bad, okay? So after that, it kind of rested there. We ended up hearing the defense just ask a few more questions, basically saying that, you know, you weren't involved in the purchase of one of these houses or the paying off of the mortgage for David's parents. Basically asked about the airline tickets to London. He said he was not involved in any way in that. He asked a question about it later, but he wasn't involved in it, didn't know about it, didn't book it, didn't get involved. He said, did you know if someone gave David some money for the booking of Celeste's flight or how it was paid for? He said, no idea, not a clue. He said, which this was interesting. They said to him, before the news came out about the body in the trunk, had you ever heard the name Celeste before? And he said, yeah, I did know the first name. I'd heard the name before, that was it. And they said, did you know the relationship she had to David? Said no. And then Beth kind of clapped back with just like two more questions after that. Said, how did you know Celeste's name? Where did you hear that? Said he heard it from Rob. And then she said, did you know that was David's girlfriend? And the judge basically the defense objected, the judge sustained it, Beth was like, all right, no more questions. That was the end of that. So that was kind of everything from that whole testimony spread over yesterday and today. I wonder if maybe it is best to wrap it up here, or maybe I could just give a little bit more info. Tell you what, I'll very quickly give you, should I give you a different, I've got like a bunch more pages, but I just don't think I'm gonna have time. So what I might have to do is save the rest of it for later. I don't know how long we've been out here. I don't want to be late back into court, that's for sure. Tell you what, I'll rest my case there. I will come back with some more information for you guys in a little bit, and hopefully I'll kind of get this video up as something for you guys to see just on the financial side of things. But there was a lot more on the financial side that kind of came after that. And maybe I'll just, you know what, I'll just quickly breeze through some of the other financial stuff. I'll keep it very, very, very sweet. But basically, somebody from Interscope Records came through, talked about the deal. I'll just breeze through the most important stuff. They basically said that they terminated David's contract in December of 2025. So bear in mind, months after the body was found, it took Interscope like 3 months before they said, oh, we're going to officially drop David. They dropped him, let him out of his contract, and he hasn't made a penny from them since January of 2026. Hasn't made a penny since then. Now, they issued a termination document. We weren't shown the document, but it was confirmed that there was a termination document. And basically after that, hang on a second, I'm going to switch back. Can I give you that for a sec? Thank you, ma'am. They basically had a termination document. So he was officially dropped. We found out the terms that he was dropped. The guy from Interscope, he was sort of a finance guy. He basically said that he's reviewed all of the finances from the start of David's career in 2022 to 2025 at the end, when they cut him off the contract period. And I'll just keep it real, we told us everything David earned. David was paid in 2022 $950,000 by Interscope, and that was split up between him, his trust, his lawyer got some money. In 2023, this was his best year. He got $3.869 million in that year. That was his best year. That was when he signed his main album deal. But here's the thing, 2024, he only made 180K because a lot of the money he earned in 2023 wasn't advanced. He didn't get to his next project. And then in 2025, he earned $2.27 million. Now, what was very, very interesting was they basically explained that his overall deal was much bigger. So his deal, basically, he had, part of his deal was kind of for merch, his album, it was kind of a mixture of that. So his first album, he basically was set to earn a maximum of like $3.24 million. He basically was paid an advance of $500,000 for that, and then the rest would kind of be distributed based on what the label spent, what was earned, but it was very successful. For his second album, he was paid $1.5 million as an advance as part of a $3 million per album deal. So he basically did his first album for cheap, His second album was a $3 million album, and then he basically had a 4-album deal where the third and fourth album were options for the label, and they would have been worth between $3 and $6 million, depending on how successful they were. And they basically said that, you know, he was also doing brand deals, and the labels were getting 10% of the brand deals. And they basically said in total for his music, David was paid a total of $5.12 million in advances for music and $1.02 million in advances for his merch deal. So he was basically getting over $6 million in advances. Obviously there was more money on the back end, but the total amount of his entire contract, which basically in total was minimum would have been $4 million for his first album, $3 million for a second, $3 million for his third, and $3 million for his fourth. So basically $13 million at the minimum as a total just for him recording and delivering the albums that he basically promised the label. The contract options of 3 and 4 weren't exercised, and they dropped him in December. So he officially lost a minimum of $6 million due to the murder, and basically they had $7 million committed to David before this news came out. He wasn't paid anything in 2026, but the upper was actually $6 million per album. So if these albums were massive hits, these $3 million albums that he missed out on because of the murder, they could have been $6 million albums. It could have been a maximum of $19 million album. His total deal, if he'd have achieved everything that he could have and this murder never happened, he could have got a maximum, if he was a massively successful artist throughout the deal, he would have got $19 million in total. Absolutely crazy. It really showed just how much he had to lose by being exposed as a PDF file by Celeste, which is allegedly what was a motive for the crime. Now, the defense grilled him. I would say that this was the defense worst hour. They really just talked around in circles. They grilled him on irrelevant stuff about the finances. They basically were grilling him on this trust, saying, oh, David didn't have access to this one trust, and then he did later when he turned 18. He was under 18 at the start. It was nonsense. They just talked around in circles, and it was really, really bad, honestly. This was actually, I would say, the defense's worst hour dealing with that guy from Interscope, because it was very clear that David stood to gain millions from his career that he was trying to protect by doing this murder. So that was the end of that. I'm going to stop there. The person, we just saw 2 people. We saw somebody from the California Highway Patrol, who's the person who found Celeste's ID card on the side of the road. And also, we have just heard just 10 minutes of testimony from an alleged, what's it called, like a forensic scientist who basically is in a position where she was one of the people that actually did the forensic pathology in the car. There was a lot more details to come on that. We only heard about 10 minutes of testimony, but that's going to be really interesting. So I'll do all of that in a separate video for you guys. But for now, I'll wrap it up there. I really appreciate you guys watching and just checking out the updates. I'm going to try and keep you guys updated on just like everything as we go forward from here. But yeah, thank you so much for everybody that's just supporting and, you know, finding my coverage of this really useful. I will catch you guys in the next video. Hopefully you find this one useful. I'm going to have my team upload this while I'm in the courthouse, and a huge thank you to them for helping me and supporting me in this time, which is very tight and stressful, but we're getting it done. So I'm really, really grateful for everyone involved. But yeah, I'll wrap it up there. Thank you so much, and I will see you guys later today.